Hi, welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the books that I read in April. So if you enjoy this type of content and other homeschool content, please remember to subscribe and let's talk about some books. Okay, so I was able to get through 3 books this last month, which was good. It was kind of a busy month. I was sick for part of it and all these things, so I feel like it was a pretty good accomplishment for me. And I enjoyed these books. I learned a lot. They're all very different. And so I'm excited to share them with you. Okay, so the first book I read was Remarkably Bright Creatures. And this was our book club book for April. And it was a really fun book. It was different. And if you read, I don't even know how it starts off because it talks about this octopus that basically has a personality. The octopus doesn't talk. It's in an aquarium and you can hear its thoughts. You can't hear its thoughts. You read about all the thoughts that the octopus is having. And so when you read the little snippet here that tells you about the book, at first you're like, this sounds a little bit weird. This octopus that like is basically speaking to us. He's not really speaking, but he's sneaking out of his cage and doing all these things and all this stuff. It just is very weird sounding. And interacting with people and all that kind of stuff. But it's actually just, it's very well done, the way that the author is able to get into like the mind of an octopus and also create these really good characters with the human. So this older woman works at an aquarium and she works the night shift, she does the cleaning. And so it's kind of how she becomes friends with this octopus. And then there's another storyline that comes in later with a boy. He's not, he is a boy, but he's 30 years old, so he's not like a child. He kind of acts like one though, with how like irresponsible and stuff he is, and he can't keep a job. And so he comes in and actually takes over her job for just a little bit because she was injured. And how they bond, and there's a lot of really good underlying story that I'm not telling you because it's a good book to read and it's a really fun one to discuss at book club. We had a really good discussion about it. So if you're looking for a book that could be fun, it also has really good intergenerational ties going on with this 30-year-old and this like 70-year-old woman and what they're learning from each other, and something that's important for our kids, for us to have, and our kids don't get it as much anymore, this interaction with older generations. And so it's just a really well done. There's a lot of fun characters. There's some sadness. It like kind of takes you through all the emotions. And again, it's different. It's a little bit weird. And it is her first book. And it's impressively well done for being her first book. And the whole thought process behind it is just like, how did you even come up with this idea? But anyway, I would recommend it, especially if you have a book club coming up, because it really is a fun book to discuss. Okay, the next book I read was The Vanishing American Adult, and this is actually my husband's book. So I have my finger in a note here and some notes on my phone since I don't write in his books. But I enjoyed this book. I say that not completely hesitantly. It is not written in a style that is my favorite. He's an economist. My husband is an economist. And so Ben Sass is a politician. And it's written a little bit more from a viewpoint that my husband would understand better than me. And there's also just a lot of data and statistics, especially in the beginning, because he's trying to establish his point. And then he goes into different things we could focus on and do and be better at, which that is where I liked the book more. But still the writing style wasn't my favorite, but the topic was spot on, especially for something that I like to read about. Because if you don't know, I studied human development in college. That's what my degree is in. And like emerging adulthood and all that kind of stuff was always just kind of a joke to me. Like, I'm like, people just need to grow up. And he talks about that, just how adults in America are disappearing. They're kind of staying children. And one of the quotes that I thought was interesting that he mentioned is, if our kids are getting old, that means we are getting old. So we keep treating our children like they're little kids. just because I think especially nowadays, I don't know if it was always like this, obviously, because I did not live back when my parents were younger, but nowadays it's like as we age, we try to fight it as much as possible, right? We do all the things. We dye our hair, we get Botox, we, do our nails. All these things are okay to some extent, but I think sometimes we get carried away with keeping that young face, and that we forget that aging is part of life. And so like he said, if our kids start getting older, if we allow them to get older, if we treat them like adults and then they start having kids themselves, then we feel old and we don't like that. So we try to fight it by keeping them like kids. Okay, if they're in our home, even in their 20s, they don't have a job, they're not reliable, or anything like that, then we, I think, feel younger. I personally don't believe this, but that is a lot of people, and I can see it around me all the time. And so that idea was interesting to me. Let me see what else I wrote down on my notes here. But, and he talked about boredom. I'm always an advocate for boredom, and how the cure for boredom is curiosity. And then there's no cure for curiosity, which I thought was cute. Just let people be bored and curious and go out and explore the world, and you don't have to provide every second of entertainment for them. And this one I totally agree with, and I see how it benefits. He said there's almost nothing more important we can do for our young than convince them that production is more satisfying than consumption. And so just the importance of putting on, just sitting in front of something and consuming it, like TV or social media, or even, just sitting somewhere and maybe not doing a whole lot, right? All you're doing is consuming the world around you. You're not producing anything. And true value, joy, reward in life comes from producing things, from creating things. That's where we find our true joy as humans. And this is the one I have marked here because I just think it is so funny. And I would totally say this, which, maybe after this you wouldn't want to be my friend. I don't know. But he says, we think it's important for our kids to learn how to suffer. He's like, some might hear that phrase as unloving, but it's actually quite the opposite. Because very simply, neither our children nor your children will grow up to be free, independent, self-respecting adults if we hand them everything without the without the expectation of something in return. It isn't the way the world works, and it is thus irresponsibly unkind. Okay, so letting our kids suffer, letting them suffer the consequences of their actions. Yes, we want to take it away. We don't want to see them go through things for being dumb, but that is life. And if we try to take it away, we are harming them, and we're also harming ourselves. And so allowing them to go through hard things and creating environments where they can go through hard things, where they're going to have to struggle. Maybe they don't like to speak in front of people. Get them up there and have them speak in front of somebody. If you prepare them enough, I know this. I have an autistic child. He spoke in front of our church congregation. He got up there by himself, and he did it by himself. And it took a lot of preparation. It's taken years of preparing him for those kind of things for him to actually be able to do it. And so putting our kids through hard things is a good thing for them, and it's a good thing for us. And so making sure that we do that. And I thought it was interesting too in his book how, I don't know, interesting is not the right word. That's just the first thing that came out of my mouth. But in the second part of it, like I said, the first part is a lot more data, statistics, and all that kind of stuff, which is important. He does talk about human development. He does establish a few things there. But when he gets into the later chapters of things we can more specifically focus on, like actually working and that kind of stuff, and traveling, but not being a tourist, which I think also is extremely important. There's a lot of times we can go on vacation, but that's what most people do all the time, is vacation. They're not actually going someplace to learn about the culture, to learn about the people, to maybe do a service project there. Okay, they're not going for those reasons. They're going to get away from their life, okay, to take a little vacation instead of really learning to serve and see the world around them. And so that was one of his chapters. But at the very end of each chapter, he has these little sections that help you just have bullet points of what you could focus on, which again, I think is so helpful because sometimes the chapter itself can be very overwhelming. You're like, what am I supposed to get from this? And what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to apply this in my life? And so you can go through these little stepping stones at the very end and be like, okay, I got it. I can figure this out. And so I really liked this whole thing. He talks about consuming less and how, you know, especially as Americans, we have to have all the things. He talks about going on trips with just the backpack, you know, just having your like 50 to 80 pounds in a backpack and trying it, like exploring the world, you know, doing uncomfortable things. And that's what creates these adults. This is what helps our kids grow up instead of always staying in this kid kind of mentality, which is becoming a huge problem. And we have just so many kids that just don't really grow up. They live with their parents forever. They don't get real jobs. They don't actually know how to get a job or to keep a job, and they don't know how to be responsible. And so I thought his book was very good. Like I said, it took me longer to read because it's just not the writing style that I'm used to or that I typically read. And so it was a little harder for me to get through. But I wanted to end it with this quote because he says, "There's no finer feeling on earth than the sun shining on you as you look at your work completed after a long day of good pain." And I think that's so true. And again, I don't think kids do that enough. And I feel like sometimes we think, oh, they're just kids, let them be kids, which is true. They can just be kids. They can be kids running outside in the wild, but they need to also have responsibilities. Okay, they need to have things that bring them back, that help them understand that they are not just a free thing in the world, that people are working hard for them to have what they do have, especially, you know, in America. There's been a lot that's happened for them to be able to have the freedoms that they do. And they need to understand that and be willing to work, to sacrifice, and to grow up personally, because a lot of kids just don't know how to grow up. Okay, so the last book I read is The Creative Act, A Way of Being. And this is for our book club this month that I am hosting. And so I read it early to try to make sure I understand it all. And this book was different than the other two books. You know, it wasn't like a story-based thing. It wasn't even necessarily a like strict theme-based thing. It reminded me of mindfulness type things. Like I don't know if I've really read a mindfulness book exactly like this, but it basically gives you different ideas and then you need to think about them. And so I've read this book and it's actually really easy to read. Okay, the words are very big, the chapters are short, and a lot of times in between the chapters, especially at the beginning, there's poems. And so, you know, you read a chapter, there's a poem, which then you've just skipped 5 pages, you know, when you start the next chapter. And so I read through it very fast, but processing it is a different thing because there's just so many like little nuggets of things. And I don't know a whole lot about the author. I need to review it a little bit this week, but my husband did show me a little clip from him, and he basically gives advice to artists. And he is not an artist himself, knows nothing about music, about drawing, about like nothing, taken no piano classes, like nothing. And yet he has amazing advice that people pay him well for. And so he wrote a book about it. But again, it's more in a poetry type of a vibe as you read it. And the book itself is part of the art with the poems and how the chapters are laid out and stuff. And so I feel like it's important to read it. There's a lot of people in our book club that just listen to books. So I wonder what their takeaway will be from it since they can't see kind of the art part of the book. But let me see what my notes were about this one, because I'm like, I don't know what I even want to say about it. Again, you have to just kind of take it chapter by chapter and you can talk about that specific chapter, because there are some things he talks about, some habits, he talks about discipline, and he talked about abundance mindset instead of scarcity. He talks about going into situations and sometimes they get, he called it demoitis, like when they create something and they get so focused on the demo that they can't see any more potential than that. So listening to a demo or even, you know, reading a rough draft over and over and over again, unless you are seeking correction on it, is sometimes not a good thing, because you get so stuck on it and you start to see it like, oh yeah, this is the best I can do. And then that's all you do, because in your head you think that's the best, where in reality you could create so much more. So that was another point. Like this, again, these points could all be taken and talked about so much. Like I think each of the chapters could be this huge discussion or something. If you did use it as mindfulness, you could look at every day or every week, just go over one chapter and have it be your focus for that week, because they're just such good little nuggets, each one. And yeah, it's not written like this or like the Remarkably Bright Creatures, where it's like a cohesive, like at the end you feel like, okay, this is the point and this is what it's coming back to. It's just little nuggets, little good nuggets of scripture. It is basically, that's kind of what it is. And let's see what else he said. Success is harder to come by when your life depends on it. I thought that was an interesting quote. And I've seen this also in like my family, extended family as well. When you're focused so much on success, he says, don't try basically to start all these random things when you don't have a way to support yourself. You know, yes, you can be a musician, you can do this artistic stuff. And again, he mentions art, being an art person is really hard to be successful in and make money. And so trying to do something when your life depends on it, when you have no other money and no other source of income, is really, really hard and usually sets you up for failure. It's a lot easier, you know, to be less stressed and calm and focused when you have other avenues. And, you know, he talks about don't choose choice A or B, find choice C, you know, being willing to look beyond maybe what's just sitting in front of you. And this is the last one I'm going to share. Like I said, there's just a lot of good nuggets in this book, but it says the synergy of a group is as important, if not more important, than the talent of the individuals. And I think that's important in a family, you know, in a friendship situation, and all these different things, that the synergy of the group is more important than each of the talents of the individuals. How you can bring it all together, work together, and make something beautiful is what's really important and what's really amazing and beautiful in the end. And so I just thought that was really cool. So sorry I don't have anything like solid or concrete to even explain really about this book. I think it's very interesting, and I think it'll be a really interesting book to discuss for book club. Okay, so those were the books that I read in April. I hope you enjoyed this review of my books. And if you have other books that you have been loving lately, comment them down below, because I love checking out your recommendations. And if you have read any of these books and have comments on them, I would love to hear them as well. And remember to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you next time.